All right. So obviously we're a little bit behind, but let's take a look. So what we're going to do is address specific questions, like I said, but strategically speaking, all right, that's not going to change anything. So in looking at some of the scores, first question is number 3. So what was the issue with number 3? All right. So in looking at question 3, what I want you to do is take a look at question 2 and 4. Okay. Right now, if you have your laptop open, you should be able to look at the review folder for today with the test. Can you see it? All right. So if you take a look at question 3, which is specifically what you asked, what I also want you to do is take a look at question 2 and 4. And the reason I want you to take a look at 2 and 4 is because what you are going to see. Remember, I told you this is from 2017. This STAAR exam from 2017. The format of the STAAR, generally speaking, does not change. Okay, you're going to get a passage, or in this case, the reading part. You're going to get a pair of passages followed by questions that address what was in those passages. Right. The formatting of the question is not going to change. You're going to get that. You're going to get a question, and you're going to get multiple choice. The things they ask you for, generally speaking, are not going to change, right? The specific skills and concepts that they want to see that you know and are able to execute, not going to change. The reason I bring that up is because if you take a look at question 3, and most importantly, question 2 and 4 around it, those are essentially 3 questions that are asking you the same thing. And here's what I mean by that. Take a look at question 2. It says, from paragraph 14, the reader can infer that the author blank. Now, first thing, once we establish the fact that that question is paragraph specific, right? We go back into the paragraph. It is then asking you directly to make an inference. Everybody see that, right? It says it clearly. The reader can infer. So it's asking you, the reader, to make an inference based on paragraph 14. Now, you remember back, an inference is a combination of what? Background knowledge plus what? Huh? What's written, right? What's given to you in the passage. What you already know, plus what the author tells you, and then you can make an inference about, whatever the question is asking. Does that make sense? Now, question 2 directly asks you for an inference. But if you take a look at question 3, which is the one you had an issue with, in cultures around the world, the little free libraries are. Does it give you a specific place to go? Doesn't give you a sentence, it doesn't give you a paragraph, none of that, right? But if you look at the wording of the question, it is an inference question, right? It's a comprehension inference question. Right. Now, the reason I said take a look at 2, 3, and 4 is because, again, they don't necessarily change a whole lot from one STAAR exam to the next. Obviously, you get different passages, but in terms of what they're asking for and how they're asking it, that's not going to change. So what you see right here is a series of inference questions. The difference between question 2 versus 3 and 4 is that question 2 is direct, whereas 3 and 4 are not. Does that make sense? Right? So understanding what the question is asking you for is an important component to answering the question. So in question 3, which says, in cultures around the world, the little free libraries are. Okay? Now, how do we go about answering that question if it doesn't support or doesn't ask for anything specific? Not asking for a sentence or a paragraph. So how would you go about answering that question? How did you go about answering that question? Okay. So in trying to answer a question, an inference question like this, now our strategies, especially as it pertains to multiple choice, have been based on what? Not really having to or trying not to read the entire passage, right? Like I've already established that's boring, that's the old way. You want to kind of get away from that. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So where did you get that from in the past? Yeah. Okay. So one thing I would like to kind of bring to your attention, when you guys are writing, and this is, I'm saying this to lay background to talk about how to answer this question. When you guys are writing, right, typically you have a formula, right, especially as it pertains to STAAR. So when you're going from when you're writing a body paragraph, we've already talked about it. You have that topic sentence, right, of the paragraph, which does what? Tells you what the paragraph is about. Then you have the next 2 to 3 sentences that do what? Back up and support that topic sentence, right? Then you have 1 or 2 sentences after that that sum up what you said in the paragraph and also transition into the next idea for the following paragraph. Does that make sense? These passages are constructed the same way. Does everybody understand that? Right? These passages are constructed the same way. If you go back and look, and we can actually do that just to give you an idea. All right, if you go back and look at any paragraph, okay? Let's look at paragraph 12, okay? Look at paragraph 12. Individual stewards are using their little free libraries in altruistic ways too. So what, without reading anything else, what can we expect to see in the remainder of the paragraph? Right, now remember, this is one of the questions, what does altruistic mean? And we know that's, selfless. That makes sense? So I'm using this to help others. I'm not doing this for me. I'm not doing it for profit. I'm doing this to help others, okay? So now that we know that, if we look at the rest of the paragraph, everything that's mentioned in the paragraph does what? It talks about how people are using little free libraries to help others, right? Tina Sapula does more than distribute groceries. She gives out books. It talks about Linda Prout bringing little free libraries after Hurricane Katrina. Does that make sense? So everything after that topic sentence supports what the topic sentence says. I didn't necessarily need to read all of that. Does that make sense? I didn't necessarily need to read all of that to gather that information. If I wanted specific information, that's when I read. Now, if you take a look at the last sentence, okay, little free libraries to girls' schools and library, filling them with books that teach business and entrepreneurial skills. Even though it's a separate part, number 13 can be considered, you could probably consider that a part of 12. But the reason I wanted to point that out is because when you're doing an inference, again, we're trying to save time, okay? When you're inferencing, all you really need is the first and last sentence of the paragraph. That was a long way of me saying that. All you really need is the first and last sentence of the paragraph. If it does not specifically point to a place, typically the first place you want to go is the first and last sentence of the paragraph. So that's when you get the main topic sentence of the paragraph, and then you get it summed up at the end. So this is what it was talking about. Does that make sense? You can do that for each paragraph. So when you get a question like this, you have general information that you can use. Remember, we talked about what an inference is, background plus what the author tells you, gives you the inference. You can get a general idea of what the answer is going to be. Does that make sense? And you guys are really out of it. All right, so with that being said, Ms. McLean, if we were to go back and look at the paragraphs, all right, one of the things that we could, reasonably surmise is that there's no real mention of the replacement of brick and mortar library, right? If you go back and look, and we can just do it real quick, okay? You can pick any paragraph, all right? Paragraph 8, paragraph 9. If you take a look at those first sentence, like even in paragraph 9, In some places, little free libraries are filling a role usually served by brick and mortar libraries. Okay, now it says usually served by brick and mortar. But if you look at paragraph 8, if you look at paragraph 10, if you look at paragraph 11 and those topic sentences, does it really talk about or continue on that idea of replacing brick and mortar libraries? Right, so that one mention of it is not necessarily the answer to number 3, right? If it's mentioned more than once, it's something to take a look at. But one mention doesn't necessarily make it the answer, right? But if you take a look at B, which is the correct answer, influencing people in positive ways, in every paragraph, there's mention of the influence that Little Free Libraries has had on somebody. Even if you just take a look at the first sentence of each paragraph, the topic sentence, you get that theme, you get that common idea. Does that make sense? So again, without having to read the entire passage, you are still able to answer those inference questions if you know exactly where to look. So when it comes to an inference question, take a look at the topic sentences, take a look at the last sentences and the transitions, and that will give you a general idea based on what the question is asking you of what the answer will be. Does that make sense? Okay. Do we have any other issues that were cause for concern? To 12? Okay. So let's just take a look at it real quick, and that will probably stop right there. The author uses parentheses in paragraphs 10 and 14 too. Okay. Now, 10 and 14, that's paragraph specific. So, believe it or not, this is an inference question, somewhat, not really, but along those lines, because they're asking you, why did the author do this? Right? The author uses parentheses in paragraphs 10 and 14 too. Okay? Even though they give you a definitive place to look, you still have to surmise why the author used those parentheses in that case. Okay? So 10 and 14, we'll just go back real quick. So here's paragraph 10. Last year, Sarah Maxey of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, discovered Little Free Libraries when browsing the crowdfunding Kickstarter. She was then inspired to launch her own LF Kickstarter campaign. The result was enthusiastic. By the time the campaign ended, Maxey had raised more than $10,000 for her cause, enough money to build dozens and dozens of little libraries. Now we take a look at 14. The little wooden boxes are refreshingly physical and human. When you open the door, serendipity and your neighbor's taste dictates what you'll find. A selection of 20 or so books, so on and so forth, right? So we know what an aside is, right? From drama, okay? You remember what an aside is. That's when the character speaking all of a sudden says something that is only meant for the audience to hear, kind of breaking that fourth wall, right? So in that regard, if you look at how these two paragraphs read, if you look at what's in parentheses, right, that aside is meant for, it's as if the author is speaking to you and then they say that off to somebody else, right? Like that's the way it reads. That makes sense? Huh? You don't remember what you picked? Is that what you said? Oh, 19? Okay. All right. I think we talked about this one before. The author uses similes at the end of paragraph 3 to highlight, and again, this is a very specific question, okay? The author uses similes. So we know what similes are, okay? But if you go to paragraph 3, okay? Our focus is the end of paragraph 3. Does everybody understand that? Our focus is the end of paragraph 3 because that's what it specifically said. So the question is what's being said at the end of paragraph 3 that is given more light as a result of the similes? So based on that, language is so familiar that we easily forget what an amazing gift it is. That's not to say ignore the rest, but at the same time, again, our focus is the end of paragraph 3. Like sunshine, like the urgency of spring, like bread, language is so familiar that we easily forget what an amazing gift it is. So when you look at what's being said, when we take a look at the answer choices for number 19, the only one that really matches what's being said is A. Make sense? All right. So I will conclude this by saying, when you get to the reading portion of your STAAR exam next week, right? Some questions will be sentence or paragraph specific. Paragraph 10, sentence 15, or whatever the case may be, right? But not all of them will be, right? That does not mean that the strategies that we talked about last week are ineffective. It just means now you need to know where you're going to focus your attention to get the answer. And again, as you heard me say earlier, take a look at the topic sentence of each paragraph. Not only will it help you with your inferencing, but it will also help you with your summarizing and your main idea. Again, just think about how you've been taught to write. What's the paragraph talking about? That's your first sentence. Then you have your supporting detail. Then you have your summation, followed by a transition into the next idea or paragraph. Make sense? That's exactly how these passages are set up. They're set up the exact same. So when you are looking, if you are not given a specific direction, specific sentence or specific paragraph, another way to keep from having to read the whole passage, take a look at the topic sentence, take a look at the last sentence. Most times the information that you're looking for, regardless of what they ask you, is going to be in those two sentences. Make sense? Any questions? Excellent. All right. So we're going to go ahead and stop the video right there.